So with us tonight from Dubai is Dr. Najad El-Sayed, and in Tel Aviv, Meir Javandafar. Good evening to you both.
Thank you.
I'd like to start with you, Dr. El-Sayed. Is this really a new chapter?
Well, first of all, let us talk about the UAE in this stage, particularly, and at this time is empowering its soft power, mainly it's the diplomacy and dealing with the hard power. We saw all of its diplomatic movements towards Syria with the visit of Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed to Syria, and lately now with Turkey, with the visit of Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed to Turkey. So in fact, diplomatic movements of UAE have been shown very apparently lately, and it has been quite fruitful, honestly. So what is happening now with Iran is not that surprising based on what is happening with the other countries. So what we see, like if we even compare during the tension times, during even like a couple of years ago, despite among tensions with Iran, the UAE has maintained a limited degree of engagement with Iran. It hasn't been cut completely like other Arab Gulf countries. For example, after the attack of the Iranians on the Saudi embassy in Tehran, in January 2016, the UAE downgraded relations, but it didn't cut it. It maintained the diplomatic relations. Got maintained. So, and also the trade relations haven't been cut all of these years. For example, in 2015, Iran had 200 billion in investment in the UAE. In 2017, the UAE was Iran's main import partner with trade between the two countries, reaching to 12.9 billion. So what is happening currently is not, if you compare what happened to the past, and especially now with all these diplomatic movements and with the empowerment of the whole soft power now, you don't see it that surprising. That's how I read it.
That's interesting, Mayor. Really, is it surprising or not that Iran is part of this initiative?
It is not, as my colleague Dr. Al-Sayed quite rightly said. This is all about Saudi. The UAE is in competition here with the Saudis for being a diplomatic superpower in this region. And quite frankly, I would say the UAE is winning. The Saudis have been having talks with Iran, but meanwhile, the UAVs, the unmanned air vehicles supplied by Iran to the Houthis continues to rain down on Saudi installations, and missiles continue to rain down. And although Iran has been playing up the progress of the talks with the Saudis, in reality, there's not that much progress on the ground. However, the UAE is no longer really that involved in Yemen, and the UAE has, by having relations almost with all sides, is really increasing its leverage in this region as a diplomatic powerhouse. We saw recently that Israel and Jordan, to conclude the recent deal whereby Israel will buy Jordanian solar energy and will supply with desalination plants, was mediated by none other than the UAE. And now with the Iranians, they're also talking. I don't share Dr. Bagheri's optimism that this is a sort of a new, beautiful chapter. No, not really. The two countries do business, absolutely. But of course, the UAE is concerned about the sanctions imposed against Iran. But again, by talking to the Iranians, while having relations with Israel, I think UAE is showing the way in this region on how to really leverage your diplomatic power.
Right. Dr. El-Sayed, so what would be the big picture, the main goal of this initiative, this new strategy by the Emiratis? Where do they want to get, with this?
Okay, let me just comment on my to the other guest comment. I totally agree with all what he said, but I have a certain comment on what he said regarding the competition between UAE and Saudi Arabia. I don't see it personally how I read it. As Saudi living in UAE, I don't read it as competition as much competing with each other's. So Saudi Arabia is a bigger country. It's like using more, maybe it's hard power. power, while the UAE is more playing with the soft power. So they are completing each other. This is one point. The second point, Iran never looked at UAE as a rivalry compared to Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia has, behold, the two holy mosques, and it represents Islam. And from this matter, Iran is competing with Saudi Arabia, and that's why they're like attacking Saudi Arabia, because they are competing with being representative of Islam. So the relationship between Iran and Saudi Arabia is different than UAE and Iran. It's different. There is kind of competition on certain things that is reflected on politics. So this is basically how I see it. So in this way, I totally agree with the guest when he said, like, it's not going to be so honeymoon relationship or like one like a new completely optimistic chapter. But it is basically like trying another way of approach, and we will see what is the consequences after that. At least UAE has tried its best with all its diplomatic skills to approach Iran in order to reduce its military hegemony through diplomatic deals. This is how I read it.
Right. Javed and Farah, I want to ask you about the Israeli angle. Obviously, Iran is a very sensitive issue for Israel. How would Israel look at all of this?
Well, to be honest with you, now that we have very good relations with the United Arab Emirates, I don't think Israel is going to press the Emiratis too hard. First of all, because we have good relations. Secondly, because the Emiratis, they're not expanding their business deals with Iran. It's the continuation of what's been happening. They have to remember that there's long-standing business relationship between the UAE, especially from Dubai, with Iran. Some of the senior Emirati families have Iranian heritage from the port city of Bandar Lenge, if I'm not mistaken, on the Iranian coast. Who moved there 200 years ago to this area, and so there's long-standing business relationship. Of course, the Emiratis are very concerned about sanctions. They take our concerns regarding Iran into consideration, but at the same time, United Arab Emirates has got its own security goals. It's got its own security ambitions, and I think so far they've shown that they have been very apt at being able to manage, and it's like a trapeze artist. They've balanced it very well. They talked to Erdogan while having good relations with the Saudis. I also think there's an element of competition there, but
we have just a minute left. I want to finish with you, Dr. Al-Said. Just briefly, will the Emiratis consider Israel in all of these new initiative and strategy of theirs?
Actually, what is UAE is doing is the benefit of everybody, including Israel, because it's balancing between the hard power and the soft power. So this is the benefit of everybody. I don't think put it in mind, if UAE is dealing with Turkey, which is, by the way, more national security threat to UAE than even Iran, by the way, because of the Erdogan's regime support to the Muslim Brotherhood. So why we are going to be surprised of what is happening with Iran?
Unfortunately, we ran out of time. I want to thank you very much, both of you. Thank you very much. A short